Imagine an emperor so obsessed with sexual gratification that he turned the Roman Empire into his personal pleasure palace, surrounding himself with male lovers who were rewarded with incredible wealth for satisfying his insatiable appetites. Picture a ruler who held beauty contests to select the most well endowed men in the empire, appointed his sexual partners to the highest government positions, and scandalized even the sexually permissive Romans with orgies that lasted for days. This is the true story of Elagabalus, the teenage emperor whose 4-year reign transformed Rome into an empire of hedonistic excess, where political power was literally determined by sexual performance. What happened during those years reveals how absolute power can corrupt absolutely, turning an empire into one man's sexual playground, while the civilized world watched in horror and fascination. Before we dive into the most sexually depraved reign in Roman history, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because Elagabalus' story shows what happens when unlimited power meets unlimited desire. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Augustus, known to history as Elagabalus, ascended to the throne of the Roman Empire in 218 AD at the age of 14, bringing with him sexual appetites and psychological instabilities that would transform the imperial court into a carnival of debauchery that shocked even Romans accustomed to their emperor's excesses. Born in Syria and raised in the exotic religious traditions of the sun god Elagabal, the young emperor combined Eastern mysticism with Roman imperial power to create a reign that prioritized personal pleasure over political responsibility. From his earliest days as emperor, Elagabalus demonstrated an obsessive fascination with male beauty and sexual performance that went far beyond the casual homosexual relationships that were common among Roman elites. The teenage emperor established what amounted to a systematic program for identifying, recruiting, and rewarding the most sexually appealing men in the empire, turning the imperial court into a gathering place for the most handsome and well-endowed males that money and power could acquire. The emperor's selection process for sexual partners was as methodical as it was scandalous. Elagabalus sent agents throughout the empire with instructions to identify men who possessed exceptional physical attributes, particularly focusing on genital size, physical strength, and sexual stamina. These recruiters were given unlimited budgets and imperial authority to acquire their targets through purchase, bribery, or kidnapping, creating a network that funneled beautiful men from every corner of the Roman world to the imperial palace. Hierocles, a blonde chariot driver from Caria, became the first and most influential of Elagabalus's male favorites when the emperor spotted him racing in the Circus Maximus and was immediately captivated by his athletic build and striking appearance. The emperor's infatuation with Hierocles was so intense that he elevated the former slave to positions of extraordinary power and wealth, making him one of the most influential people in the empire based entirely on his sexual appeal and performance in the imperial bedroom. The court's reaction to Elagabalus's obvious sexual obsessions revealed the complex dynamics of power, tradition, and sexuality that governed Roman political life. While homosexual relationships were common and generally accepted among Roman men, the emperor's complete abandonment of traditional masculine roles and his obvious subservience to his male lovers violated fundamental Roman concepts of authority, dignity, and imperial behavior. Elagabalus's grandmother, Julia Maesa, who had orchestrated his rise to power, watched with growing alarm as her grandson's sexual appetites began to dominate his political decision-making. She had expected to control the young emperor and use his position to advance her family's interests, but instead found herself competing with a series of male lovers who wielded increasing influence over imperial policy and appointments. The emperor's daily routine became centered around the acquisition and enjoyment of sexual pleasure, with official state business relegated to whatever time remained after his erotic activities. Morning audiences with senators and foreign ambassadors were frequently delayed or canceled because Elagabalus was occupied with his lovers, while important military and financial decisions were postponed in favor of elaborate sexual entertainments that could last for days. The transformation of the Roman imperial court from a center of political power into a hedonistic pleasure palace marked the beginning of a reign that would redefine the boundaries of acceptable imperial behavior and demonstrate how sexual obsession could corrupt the most powerful position in the ancient world. Elagabalus's imperial palace became a carefully curated collection of the most sexually appealing men in the Roman Empire. As the young emperor assembled what amounted to a male harem that served both his personal pleasure and his desire to surround himself with living embodiments of masculine perfection. The emperor's systematic approach to acquiring and maintaining this collection of sexual partners revealed both his obsessive personality and his complete disregard for traditional Roman values regarding appropriate imperial behavior. The palace staff responsible for managing Elagabalus's collection of male lovers included specialized servants whose only job was to catalog the physical attributes, sexual preferences, and performance capabilities of each man in the emperor's entourage. These records, which were maintained with the same attention to detail that other emperors devoted to military logistics or financial planning, documented everything from body measurements to sexual techniques, creating a bureaucracy of hedonism that treated human beings as inventory in the emperor's pleasure warehouse. Zodicus, a massively built athlete from Smyrna, joined the imperial harem after agents reported that he possessed the largest genitals in Asia Minor, a qualification that immediately earned him a place in Elagabalus's inner circle and a salary that exceeded what most Roman governors received for ruling entire provinces. Zodicus's rapid rise to prominence demonstrated how the emperor had completely inverted traditional Roman values, creating a system where sexual attributes mattered more than military valor, political skill, or administrative competence. The daily routine within the imperial harem was structured around Elagabalus's sexual schedule and personal preferences, with different lovers assigned to specific times, activities, and ceremonial functions. Morning sessions might feature athletic young men who could satisfy the emperor's desire for vigorous physical activity, while evenings were reserved for more sophisticated partners who could provide intellectual companionship along with sexual services. The competition among the emperor's male lovers was intense and often deadly, as men who had achieved wealth and status through their sexual appeal fought to maintain their positions against newer arrivals who might offer novel attractions or superior physical attributes. This rivalry was deliberately encouraged by Elagabalus, who enjoyed watching his lovers compete for his attention and used their jealousy and insecurity to maintain control over men who might otherwise have developed enough influence to challenge his authority. The economic impact of maintaining such an elaborate system of sexual entertainment was staggering, as the emperor spent vast sums on acquiring new lovers, maintaining their lifestyles, and providing the luxury accommodations that befitted their status as imperial favorites. The cost of housing, feeding, clothing, and entertaining hundreds of male concubines diverted resources that should have been used for military expenses, infrastructure projects, and other essential functions of imperial government. Religious ceremonies became occasions for displaying the emperor's collection of beautiful men, as Elagabalus incorporated his lovers into the exotic Syrian religious rituals that he practiced as high priest of the sun god Elagabal. These ceremonies often included sexual elements that scandalized Roman observers and reinforced the perception that the emperor had abandoned Roman traditions in favor of foreign decadence. The psychological dynamics within the harem were complex and often destructive, as men who had been elevated to extraordinary wealth and status found themselves completely dependent on the sexual whims of an increasingly unstable teenager whose favor could disappear as quickly as it had been granted. The most shocking aspect of Elagabalus's reign was his systematic appointment of sexual partners to the highest positions in the Roman government, creating a unique form of administration where political power was distributed based on erotic performance rather than merit, experience, or loyalty to the empire. This unprecedented fusion of sexuality and governance transformed the Roman state into a pleasure-based autocracy that scandalized contemporaries and created administrative chaos throughout the empire. Heracles, the chariot driver who had first captured the emperor's attention, found himself elevated to the position of praetorian prefect, effectively the second most powerful person in the empire, based entirely on his sexual relationship with Elagabalus rather than any military or administrative qualifications. His appointment meant that the security of Rome and the emperor's personal safety were entrusted to a man whose primary skill was satisfying his lover's erotic desires, creating obvious vulnerabilities that enemies of the regime were quick to exploit. The Senate's reaction to these appointments revealed the deep tensions between traditional Roman concepts of governance and the emperor's revolutionary approach to political power. Senators who had spent decades building their careers through military service, legal expertise, and political maneuvering found themselves outranked by former slaves and athletes whose only qualification was their sexual appeal to a teenage emperor. The resulting resentment and humiliation created a political crisis that would ultimately contribute to Elagabalus's downfall. Aurelia Aquilia Severa, a Vestal virgin whom Elagabalus married in a ceremony that violated one of Rome's most sacred religious taboos, found herself sharing the emperor's affections and political influence with his male lovers in an arrangement that created unprecedented confusion about imperial succession and religious authority. The emperor's claim that his marriage to a Vestal virgin would produce divinely blessed children was undermined by his obvious preference for male sexual partners and his public statements about wanting to undergo surgical procedures to become a woman. The day-to-day administration of the empire became increasingly erratic as important decisions were made based on the emperor's sexual relationships rather than political necessity or administrative logic. Military appointments, tax policies, and diplomatic initiatives were all influenced by which of the emperor's lovers happened to be in favor at any given moment, creating a system of governance that was both unpredictable and ultimately unsustainable. Foreign diplomats and provincial governors struggled to navigate a political system where their success depended on understanding and potentially participating in the emperor's sexual politics. Ambassadors who arrived in Rome expecting to conduct traditional diplomatic negotiations found themselves required to participate in elaborate sexual entertainments or risk offending an emperor whose favor was essential for their mission's success. The economic consequences of this sex-based political system were severe, as vast resources were diverted to support the emperor's lovers and their extravagant lifestyles, while essential government functions were neglected or abandoned entirely. Military preparations were delayed, infrastructure projects were canceled, and tax collection became irregular as the empire's attention and resources were focused on satisfying one man's sexual appetites. The legal system also became corrupted by sexual politics, as court cases were decided based on the emperor's relationships with the parties involved rather than evidence or legal precedent. Justice became a commodity that could be purchased through sexual services or erotic entertainment, undermining the rule of law that had been one of Rome's greatest achievements. By 222 AD, Elagabalus' transformation of the Roman Empire into his personal pleasure palace had created such widespread disgust and political instability that even his own family began plotting his removal, understanding that the empire's survival required ending a reign that had subordinated governmental function to sexual gratification. The emperor's increasingly erratic behavior and complete abandonment of traditional Roman values had alienated every important constituency in the empire, from the military to the Senate to the common people who had once celebrated his accession to power. The Praetorian Guard, whose loyalty was essential for any emperor's survival, had grown increasingly frustrated with an emperor who promoted their leaders based on sexual performance rather than military capability. The guards who were responsible for protecting Elagabalus found themselves serving a ruler who cared more about his lover's comfort than his soldiers' welfare, creating resentment that would prove fatal when the final crisis arrived. Julia Mamaea, Elagabalus's aunt, and the mother of his cousin Alexander Severus, emerged as the leader of the conspiracy to remove the sexually obsessed emperor from power. She recognized that her nephew's reign had become not just an embarrassment, but an existential threat to the empire's stability, as provincial governors began to question orders from Rome, and foreign enemies saw the emperor's obvious weakness as an opportunity for invasion or rebellion. The final confrontation came when Elagabalus attempted to eliminate Alexander Severus, whom he correctly perceived as a threat to his continued rule. The emperor's plan to murder his cousin and potential successor revealed his awareness that his sexual politics had created enemies who were actively working to destroy him. But his attempt to solve this problem through violence rather than reform demonstrated his complete inability to understand the depth of opposition his reign had generated. The assassination of Elagabalus on March 11th, 222 AD, was carried out by Praetorian guards who had finally been pushed beyond their tolerance for an emperor whose sexual obsessions had corrupted every aspect of imperial governance. The 18-year-old emperor died along with his mother, Julia Soaemias, and his lover Hierocles, ending a reign that had lasted less than 4 years, but had fundamentally damaged the prestige and effectiveness of the imperial office. The immediate aftermath of Elagabalus's death revealed the extent to which his sexual politics had corrupted Roman governmental institutions, as his successor Alexander Severus spent the early years of his reign trying to restore traditional administrative practices and rebuild the empire's military and financial strength. The damage to Rome's international reputation was particularly severe, as foreign powers had lost respect for an empire that appeared to be ruled by sexual deviants rather than competent leaders. The historical legacy of Elagabalus's reign served as a powerful warning about the dangers of allowing personal sexual obsessions to override political responsibility and administrative competence. Later, Roman historians used his story as an example of how quickly an empire could decline when its leaders prioritized pleasure over duty, creating a cautionary tale that would influence imperial behavior for generations. Modern historical analysis of Elagabalus's reign has revealed it as one of the most extreme examples of how absolute power can corrupt absolutely, demonstrating that even the strongest governmental systems can be destroyed by leaders who subordinate public welfare to private gratification and sexual obsession. The next time you think power and privilege guarantee happiness, remember Elagabalus, an emperor who had everything but destroyed himself and his empire, trying to satisfy desires that could never be fulfilled. His story reminds us that unlimited power without moral boundaries leads inevitably to corruption, chaos, and collapse. If this shocking expose of how sexual obsession destroyed the Roman Empire fascinated you, smash that like button, subscribe for more untold stories of power corrupted by desire, and hit that notification bell, because the most important lessons about leadership come from studying its most spectacular failures. What other historical rulers do you think were destroyed by their own appetites? Share your thoughts in the comments below.